Here we go. So running a disciplinary process. Now, just as a quick catch before we get started, this webinar is intended to be for employers or managers or business owners, people who have to make decisions about managing poor performance or bad behavior at work. So if you are an employee yourself, you are very welcome to stick around, but the content isn't targeted to you. So if it feels like you're not quite in the right room, you're welcome to dock off. I can't see that you've disengaged from the webinar, so I won't heckle you on your way out, but just confirming that this is a content session for people leaders and for business managers. So a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. As I mentioned, or I didn't mention, slides will be available afterwards. Once the webinar wraps, within a day or two, we'll send out a follow-up email providing you with some resources, including a copy of these slides. So if you need to duck away quickly to take a phone call or get a cup of tea, you're welcome to. You will have access to the slides later on in case it's a useful resource to you or to anyone else in your business. And of course, questions are really welcome. It's incredibly boring if I sit here and just talk to myself for an hour. So you are welcome to pop your questions through as we go. We'll have about 10 to 15 minutes for Q&A towards the end of the session today, which is where I will answer your questions. So if you ask them as we go through and I'm not picking them up, that's on purpose. Often we cover off a lot of the questions that come through by the time we've got to the end of the session. So we will get there towards the end. Alternatively, if you would like to hold on to your question and ask it once we get to the end, that's fine as well. But questions very welcome today. So what to expect in terms of content, the first thing we'll do is we'll talk about grounds for considering a disciplinary process. We'll look at some different strategies for managing workplace issues, and then we'll jump into the legal stuff. When we get to the disciplinary process itself, we will talk about prep, we'll talk about notification, we'll talk about the response meeting, and then kind of confirming your outcome. So there will be a fair bit of process chat today as we go through things. I also have a legal update for you with some changes that came through in February that are starting to trickle through into the ERA in terms of what we're seeing with cases being decided related to disciplinary. So a bit of a chat there. We'll talk about the bonus resources you'll get, and like I flagged, some time for questions at the end. Last chance to duck away if this is not the webinar you thought you were signing up for today, but let's see how we go. So here are the reasons you might be thinking about a disciplinary process at work. The first and most common tends to be because an employee isn't performing where you need them to be. So this is failing to consistently deliver on what's expected of them. Classically, this might be not hitting sales targets. This could be poor or sloppy communication with clients. It might be not getting enough work done. Could be not getting enough work done to the appropriate level of quality. Maybe someone is really, really fast and blasts out reports, 3 or 4 a day. But if the quality of those is really poor and you're constantly having to go through and pick up on typos or make changes, they're getting enough work done, but it's not to the level of quality that you need. So it might be a reason you're thinking about a disciplinary process. Missing deadlines is a classic. If you're getting complaints from customers, obviously you need to be doing something about that behavior. And if they are performing inconsistently, sometimes they're on the boil and things are going really well. Then they have an off month, and the next month they're pretty good, and they have a great month, and they're still not meeting targets again. That inconsistency does amount to poor performance. Now, I'm not saying that you can't have a day, where you're not at your best. We're all human. Having bad days is kind of a feature of the experience. So someone can have a bad week or a bad day, and that might not amount to inconsistency in their performance. It's just they're having a tough week or a bit of a day where they're not at their best. That's not what I'm talking about. Consistency is not perfection. We're not looking for perfect performance, but we are looking for consistent performance. So if you have someone in your team or your business about whom you say, God, when they're good, they're really good, but they just haven't been good lately. I just wish they could be on all the time. You might be looking at that inconsistency performance issue, which might prompt you to think about how you want to address or deal with the situation. Now, leaving poor performance behind, we come into the misconduct space. And misconduct is behaviour that undermines trust and confidence in the employment relationship. So it's things like being repeatedly late to work is a misconduct issue, usually, being rude to colleagues or customers, being surly or a bit apathetic, or, it's that person who you have to really take a deep breath before you go and deal with them, or you have to grit your teeth before picking up a project with them because they're just far difficult to work with. Someone who isn't following reasonable instructions or company policy, passive aggression in the workplace, behaving inappropriately. Obviously that's a pretty broad umbrella, but any of those pieces amount to misconduct, and it's behavior that you can manage with informal or formal tools as appropriate. Sometimes this stuff can be hard to track. If someone's not delivering what's expected of them in the role, typically that's a bit more visible. Like there'll be a clear deadline that gets missed, or they won't be hitting their targets, or you'll be getting consistent feedback from customers about the quality of work that they do. That all tends to be a bit easier to see. Some of this behavioral stuff can fly below the radar for quite a while. Again, I'm not talking about employees having to be bubbly and perky and extroverted all the time. That's not all of us, and it would be really unreasonable to expect people to be extroverted all the time. I'm talking about behavior that undermines your trust and confidence in them, that they can be a good colleague or a good member of a team, or that they will do what they say they will do when you're talking about getting work done. It's sometimes that stuff that when you are trying to track it to figure out if you're losing your mind or if actually this person is being a bit difficult to deal with, if you put it all in a spreadsheet, you start feeling a bit insane because it's often lots of little examples rather than one really clear behavior or one really clear kind of incident. But if you find yourself feeling a bit ill at ease with someone, just not quite sure if their behavior is trustworthy, it might be worth having a conversation with someone like me or getting some advice to figure out if you're looking at a misconduct piece, because it's behavior that's undermining trust and confidence, and that can take lots of different forms. Now, we come to serious misconduct, of course, and serious misconduct is behavior that significantly undermines trust and confidence. It's typically, you recognize it when you see it. So some of the examples we're talking about include serious or repeated failures to follow instructions. Ultimately, if you can't trust your employees to do as you're asking them to do, it's hard to trust them as employees. Fundamentally, the role of an employee is to carry out the work that's been asked of them. And if someone is repeatedly or seriously failing to follow those instructions, that can veer into serious misconduct territory more quickly than sometimes we expect. Harassment, bullying, discrimination, obviously serious misconduct issues, fraud or stealing, dishonesty and lying, assault or violence, health and safety breaches, and breaches of good faith. Hopefully no surprises to see this here on the serious misconduct side of things, but it's behaviour that really obviously has undermined your trust and confidence in them. And this is where we tend to have more examples of a one-off thing, like if someone's lost their temper and thrown a chair against a wall, or you've seen them steal $50 from the till. Those kind of one-off examples tend to fall into the serious misconduct category more than misconduct, as a general rule of thumb, not as a hard and fast rule to apply. So if we're dealing with any of these behaviours, we have a series of tools that we can use to manage the behaviour. Now, this is not a step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. You don't have to follow all of these in sequence before you can get to a disciplinary. But I do want to draw your attention to the fact that sometimes a disciplinary isn't the right tool to use. HR people and lawyers are very familiar and comfortable with these quite formal performance or behavioural management tools. But sometimes when you're holding a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And so I just want to reiterate that sometimes there is a very human conversation you can have with someone before it gets to that stage where you can maybe sort things out. And again, there are other tools that you have if you're needing to manage an issue before we get to the disciplinary. So let's go through them. Now, we have a set of informal tools that we can use to manage this kind of behaviour in the workplace. And the first of these is sometimes doing nothing. Now, I'm not talking about doing nothing as in leaving something alone, but this is just about monitoring the situation. You've got it on your radar and you're stepping in if things don't improve. Coming in hard and fast like a ton of bricks is often going to result in you moving before you have all the information, and sometimes needing to walk something you've said back. So it is usually appropriate to pause at least a little bit and just see if the situation is going to get any better. So An example of that might be you had a colleague one of your team who snapped at you in a meeting and was really aggressive in kind of the way that they conducted themselves that morning. If that person is otherwise pretty even-tempered and good to work with and doesn't lose their temper very often, you might not immediately pull them aside and say, we're having a record of discussion about how inappropriate your language was this morning. That's probably an overreaction to what's going on. You might just want to pause and see if it happens again. And if it happens a second time or a third time, you might choose to pull them up on it. But sometimes just doing nothing and monitoring the situation is the right way to go. You don't always have to step in and be the school teacher in the schoolyard every time someone slips up or behaves in a way that's not exactly on the money. Sometimes your next step is to gather some information. With this person in particular, if it happened a second time, or maybe even the first time, you might pull them aside and quietly say, hey, I noticed that you've been behaving quite aggressively in the project meetings we're having about this issue lately. It's a bit out of character for you. Normally I see that you're very even-tempered, you're very composed in these meetings. Is there anything going on that I need to be aware of? Because you're behaving in a way that's a bit out of character for you. And all you're doing is you're not putting a PIP in place, you're not writing a disciplinary, you're just having a conversation to get a bit more information about what's happening. And I would expect most of the time that person would say, look, I'm really sorry, I've completely had it with this customer. I'm getting calls from them at all hours of the day and night. I'm just over it, frankly. Or they might say, oh, look, I'm really sorry. We've had some bad news about my dad's health at the moment. It's really weighing on my mind. He lives, a 2-hour drive away. It's quite hard to get up and see him. It's been weighing on me a bit, and I'm sorry I've lost my temper. It's not a you issue, and I'll do a better job of managing things next time. So often there will be something going on, especially if it's out of character for someone, and you will be very glad that you didn't show up with a PIP in hand, kind of ready to lay down the law. All you needed to do was get a bit more information. Clearly something's going on, or they're managing an issue, and hopefully you'll see that behaviour change. Sometimes it's just about giving feedback. Now, giving feedback is absolutely a part of what we should expect to be doing as managers and leaders and business owners. Feedback sometimes can feel uncomfortable, but we shouldn't be waiting for our 3-monthly performance review check-in, and we shouldn't be waiting until we've been holding on to our feedback and we haven't been saying anything, but we've been getting more and more frustrated and more allergic to this person, and suddenly a little thing happens and we hit the absolute roof because we've been holding on to this feedback all the time. Feedback should just be a part of the cadence of catching up with people as part of your weekly conversations. Sometimes giving it in the moment or quite promptly is appropriate, but feedback should just be helping people course correct. As you can imagine, very common with new starters or with graduates who join your business, because they are still figuring out how to be in the workplace and how to be a professional and how to work in your trade or your industry. So feedback doesn't need to be a negative thing. It's helping people course correct. And most of the time, if you give someone some genuine, accurate, clear feedback, they will apologize. They might be a bit embarrassed, but they will take it on board and sort of manage out of that situation. So again, we're still talking about informal tools. We're not talking about punishment. We're just talking about ways that we can manage the behavior that we're seeing so that we can all kind of work together and get things done. Now, we're escalating things slightly here. So an informal discussion would be pulling aside that person who has, been aggressive and been really losing their temper at work, and pulling them into a room or maybe going for a coffee and saying, hey, I need to raise something with you. I've observed that you are frequently losing your temper at work. Your email responses are abrupt to maybe the point of rudeness. You are losing your temper in meetings and talking to our customers and your colleagues in ways that I don't think are appropriate. I had a chat with you a couple of weeks ago to see, what might have been going on, and you told me that your dad was sick, or you were dealing with this frustrating customer, which I understand. But this behavior is now continuing. And so I'm flagging to you that this is not okay and that we need to have a bit of a plan to address this. So what do you think we can do to support you? Do you need any help from me dealing with this customer? What can we do to make this more manageable for you? And you'll notice that's a real tone shift to the gathering information stage. We're still just having a conversation, but we're identifying that there is a consistent pattern of behaviour here. We're naming the examples that we've seen. We're explaining that it's not appropriate and needs to change, and we're asking for a clear next step in terms of how we can address the issue. So it's more of a tone or a feeling change than a format change, if that makes sense. But again, if this person's behavior improves and they can move things on, they can maybe change their lifestyle, so they're getting a bit more exercise, or they're getting some more sleep, or that take some time off to go and spend time with their parent who's unwell. If they can take steps to address it, again, we can still avoid a disciplinary. Shit happens. Life is hard. Sometimes we just need a bit of support to get there. That doesn't mean that that we should be uncomfortable with, or that we should avoid holding our staff and our team accountable, but we don't always need to leap straight to a disciplinary piece. If we're using some of these informal tools, often we can avoid the disciplinary route because we are showing what's acceptable and what's not, holding people accountable, and setting these guardrails as to how we accept that people will behave in our workplace. Now, this is where we get into formal tools. So the first of these would be a formal discussion, usually supported by a record of discussion. And so the format is quite similar to our informal discussion, but you are going to show up with some paperwork. So you will show up with a record of discussion form, which looks like a piece of paper that you've written on what the issues are. The space for the employee's response is going to be a bit of a plan. So the conversation would go, hey, Sylvie, I've been observing that there's a pattern of behaviour here that needs addressing. I've written down these examples. I'm going to read them out to you. What's your response? What's been going on with your side of things? You hear the employee's response, you write it down, you say, thank you, I understand that you're still managing this frustrating customer issue or this health problem. What are we going to do as a plan? What are we going to change? You've asked for a week off to go and visit your parent. That's fine, let's approve that. You've explained that you were going to be taking some steps to get a bit more exercise in and to get a bit more sleep, so you're better resourced. Cool, we've agreed that. And do you need anything from work? Would it be helpful if we said that the last 2 hours of every day you didn't have any meetings, so you could focus on just moving your deliverables along and people wouldn't bother you? That would be helpful. Okay, great. We're agreeing that from 3 to 5 every day, no one's going to interrupt. You can have some quiet time. Great. Here's a record of our discussion today, Sylvie. I've signed it down the bottom, and now it's your turn to sign the document and give it back to me. Great, thank you. A copy of this is going to go on your personnel file, and then I'm going to send you a copy so you have one as well. That tone and that experience is very different to even the informal discussion, which itself was a step up on just having a chat about what's going on. There is paperwork involved. Someone is taking notes. There is a record going onto their file. You are signing things, and they are going to get a copy of the record of the conversation. Again, we're now in a formal space because we're talking about kind of documentation and things being recorded. But what we are really doing is sending a clear signal to this person that this behavior is not appropriate. Again, you might not always use these things in sequence, but I find it helpful to talk about them sequentially because it gives you a feel as to how the experience of being on the receiving end of this as an employee changes. So now we come to a performance improvement plan. So this is a document which talks about the behaviour that needs to improve, what the support is that we're going to give them to improve, and deadlines for things. So typically this is a time-bound program. Depending on your context, it might be 1 week long if you're in a call center, or maybe in retail where you have the opportunity for many, many interactions and a person can quickly show that they're behaving in a different way. Or it might be a PIP that's 12 weeks. If you're in a role like mine, where if I needed to course correct something, it takes a while for the outcomes to show. Like, it just takes longer to see those behavioral changes, to see their effects, or to see the performance improvement. Excuse me. So the length of a PIP really depends on what's appropriate for the role, but there will be a time frame. There will be some clear objectives for this person to meet. You are clearly naming what support that you're going to provide them, and we're going to be catching up on a regular basis to review the PIP. Now, either because all of these tools haven't worked, or you've tried a combination of them, or the issue is consistent or serious enough that we're now talking about a disciplinary, we come to a disciplinary process, and we're going to look at that in a lot of detail today, so I won't explain it here in very much detail. But what it is it's a consultation process to manage behaviour or performance at work that results in a punitive outcome. So a formal warning, a final written warning, or potentially termination. So I'm just checking in to make sure that we haven't had any questions come through. Bear with me for 2 seconds. A couple of questions, but then we will start and answer those later. All good. Thank you for waiting. Cool. I'm just going to go back and share that screen again. Lovely. Let's crack in. So let's talk about good faith and the disciplinary process. So good faith is a legal obligation that employers and employees have towards each other, and it applies at all times. So it's Section 4 of the Employment Relations Act, and that's how you know it's important. It's Section 4, like it's right up there at the first things that you see when you get into the Act. And good faith is about not doing anything directly or indirectly, to mislead or deceive, or that is likely to mislead or deceive. It's also to be active and constructive and responsive and communicative in our relationships with each other. Now, this obligation applies to employees. If the employee is behaving in a way which is a breach of good faith, then we can hold them accountable through disciplinaries. We talked about that a bit earlier. And as employers, it means it shows up in the disciplinary process in a few different ways, which is why I highlighted here. So, like I flagged earlier, this is formal consultation with an employee. It may result in a formal warning, a final warning, or dismissal, which might be with or without notice. Now, sometimes we go through a disciplinary process, we hear the employee's feedback, and we decide not to issue them with a warning. So the outcome is that there is no outcome. In my experience, it happens in like fewer than 5% of cases. Typically, by the time you get to a disciplinary, you're pretty clear that there is an issue that needs to be managed. But if you go through a disciplinary piece and there is no outcome, that's something you might arrive at as well. What's important when thinking about a disciplinary process is that there has to be substantive justification. So there has to be the behaviour or the performance issue or the one-off thing that's gone wrong that you're managing. And there needs to be procedural fairness at the process. Just like in the criminal justice system, if you have an employee caught on, a person, not an employee, if you have a person caught on camera ram raiding a dairy, or if you have them caught on camera stealing from a shop, they are still entitled to go through a process to figure out what the most appropriate outcome is. It's the same in the employment world. You have to have a good reason for going through this process, and your process itself has to be procedurally fair and make sure the employee has access to all of their entitlements. So let's look at some of those. You are not allowed by law to just issue someone with a formal written warning or just issue them with a final written warning. You must explain, we'll talk about the process, but you can't just go straight to an outcome. There's a process to follow first. So some of the rights the employee has is to know everything that might be important in the decision to give them a warning or dismiss them. So this might be giving them copies of the CCTV footage that you've had. This might be giving them copies of the customer complaints. It might involve showing them the time and attendance records that you've been keeping. Whatever it is that is in your mind as you're thinking about this disciplinary process, you'll need to go through with them and make it available to them. The employee can also ask for more information if it's relevant to the process. For example, if you are saying that they've been late multiple times, they can ask you, well, what are the days that I've been late on? Can you please give me a list of the times and the days when I've been late? That's pretty relevant information. If they've lost a copy of their employment agreement and say, I understand that we're going through a disciplinary process. Can you please give me a copy of my signed employment agreement because I don't have one? All appropriate and all super relevant. If you've ever been through a disciplinary process, you will know that sometimes employees and their advocates or their representation stall and ask for all kinds of information that isn't even really adjacent to what it is that you're discussing. Again, if it's relevant, you should provide it. But if it's not in the picture of what we're talking about, you don't have to. Sometimes you might want to provide it just to like shut the lawyer up or shut the advocate up and kind of keep things moving along. But if it's not relevant, you don't have to provide it. Employees are also entitled to a reasonable amount of time to seek advice and prepare a response. So what's reasonable depends a lot on the circumstances. If it was a disciplinary about lateness and the outcome you were proposing was just a formal written warning and there were 5 to 10 examples of lateness, I would say 2 to 3 business days is probably a reasonable amount of time to give this employee so that they can read through the documents, figure out what they want to say, and then come back to you with a response. If it's a disciplinary where the outcome might be termination, there's a lot of material to cover, like screeds and screeds of complaints or witness statements or lots of examples kind of illustrating the pattern of behaviour you're concerned about. Or if the employee has care responsibilities and needs extra time to prepare their response, if they are trying to get a hold of their lawyer or their representative and they can't and they need more time, any of those factors would be reasonable ones for the employee to ask for more time. Typically up to about 2 weeks is reasonable. Anything beyond that, there would need to be kind of an unusual reason why the employee needs more time. So 2 to 3 business days to 2 weeks is typically what we see, but it might be longer if there are circumstances that would justify the employee needing more time to prepare a response. The employee also has a right to representation or support. A representative is someone who is there speaking on their behalf, like a consultant or a lawyer or an advocate. A support person is someone who's there for moral support. Typically, that's a family member or a friend or someone close to them who isn't representing them during this process, but is there to make it a bit less uncomfortable, really. That person might have questions or might prompt the employee to say things and to help them kind of coach them through their response, but they are there to support the employee, not to represent them. And the employee also has a right of reply. There is often more to these situations than we first understand. And so the reason that the law is so prescriptive about this process is that it says you are putting a series of concerns to the employee, and then the employee needs to be able to give their side of the story. An example I often use is we have a customer who runs cinema chains, and they had a male employee come to them. Their employees tend to be in their late teens and early 20s, and say that his female colleague, let's call her Lucy, that Lucy was going through his locker and looking at his stuff, and that she's been being really rude, and that she was stealing stock, and all of these allegations about the behaviour of Lucy and how she was a shit employee and stealing from them and kind of invading her colleagues' privacy, all this stuff. And the manager of the cinema location also was a fraction on the inexperienced side. And so she went in all guns blazing, like fully prepared to run a disciplinary, couldn't believe that she'd trusted Lucy and Lucy had let her down. And when they had the conversation with Lucy to kind of present her with these allegations, Lucy kind of sighed and said, yeah, look, I'm really sorry that this is kind of been escalated to you guys. What you don't know is that me and this male colleague broke up a couple of weeks ago. We've been together for about 8 months, and we've now split up. And he has been like bombarding me and trying to get a hold of me on all of our social media channels and trying to text me, and I've blocked his number. And he's like sort of making life hard for me at work. But that's the context that you're aware of. And I didn't steal any stock, and I haven't gone through his locker, and cha-cha-cha. So the manager had to very quickly de-escalate what she'd leapt in with with righteous fury to try and deal with these issues. So it's really important in that particular example. Obviously, there was context we needed to be aware of. Even when it's not that extreme, it is important, again, for employees to give their side of the story. They might have received conflicting instructions from management, or there might have been other factors that you weren't aware of that might change your decision. So again, making sure employees have a right of reply is a really critical part of the disciplinary process. So let's talk about what this looks like, and then we should be finishing up at about 12:40 or 12:45, so plenty of time for questions. And we also had some questions come through before the webinar, so I will see who's in the room and what questions you have, and I can also use some of the ones that were sent to us beforehand. So prep, kickoff, response, and outcome. Now, stage 1 is getting ready to do the disciplinary. So you've been made aware of a problem. Maybe it's a pattern of behaviour you've observed. Maybe a complaint has come to you. Maybe you've had colleagues complaining about someone they work with or their manager. But you are documenting the situation. You're gathering your supporting information and outlining potential consequences. So you're prepping a letter to go to your employee, or an email. This letter or email should include what the issues were. So the poor performance or the misconduct and the story of what's happened, as well as any supporting info. So you're attaching timesheets, you're going to email them a copy of the CCTV footage, whatever's in front of you, the policy that they signed, which said that they would lock up the store a certain way, which they've been ignoring. How they knew this wasn't acceptable, so their employment agreement outlining their obligations to you, if you've had previous chats with them about why this behaviour is not okay, if there's a record of discussion or a PIP related to this, all of the stuff you want to include is to say, you knew that this thing that you have done or not done wasn't appropriate, and here's my evidence supporting that. Talk about what the potential outcome is. The reason we do this is that if an employee is told that they might be receiving a formal written warning, versus if they're told that they might be losing their job, they might make different choices about how carefully to prepare their response, whether they do want to get advice from a lawyer or a representative. So being really clear about outcomes is important. If you action without notice, you can always de-escalate it. If it turns out that there were mitigating factors you weren't aware of, you can choose to go with a formal warning or a final warning instead. But if you say the outcome might be a formal written warning, you can't then escalate if it turns out it's more serious. At some point during that process, you would have to say, okay, here's all the new information that's come to light. This is information I didn't have when we started this process 2 weeks ago. I am representing all of this information to you so you have it in one place. And I'm also flagging that now the outcome of this process might be summary dismissal because of all these extra things. You basically have to reset the consultation time period because now the outcome might be termination. There's new information you need to sort of gather and give to the employee. So it resets the clock in some ways on the disciplinary process. In your letter to the employee, you want to talk about timelines, say when you would like to meet with them again, explain how long it might take you to make a decision. You don't have to bind yourself to those timelines, but do give them an indication of what to expect as you move through. And explain they've got the right to seek advice and invite them to your response meeting. So just be clear about next steps. Make sure that you're not rushing things or that the employee can't say that you bullied them into attending with no representation. You're just setting out a bunch of information so the employee understands what to expect and what their rights are. Kick-off, so stage 2, this is where you are first communicating this to the employee. Excuse me. So the first thing you do, because you've done all your prep, you've got your letter and your package of information to go to the employee, is meet with them to start the disciplinary process with them. Face-to-face is preferred. Obviously, these are stressful, uncomfortable conversations. It's courteous to meet in person, but a video call or a phone call might be appropriate instead, especially if you're not working at the same location. Worst comes to worst, if the employee is ducking and dodging your calls and you can't get a hold of them, it is okay to email this to them so they have everything in front of them. That's fine. But as much as you can, try and have an actual meeting with them first. Now, this is a question we get quite often. You don't have to give them notice of the meeting, but you can choose to. At some point, the employee will become aware that something is afoot, right? And so either that's when you pull them aside and say, hi, we are meeting with you and here's the letter and here's what we're doing. The alternative is a few days beforehand to book a meeting and say something like, hey, I've got some concerns about your behaviour at work or your performance at work that I'd like to address with you. I'd like to meet with you in 2 days' time at 2 p.m. and you're welcome to bring a support person or a representative. That sometimes is the kind choice if you think that this person is going to need that support. For example, if they don't have English as a first language, or if they are someone who is younger and sort of a bit unfamiliar with how this stuff can go, or someone who gets quite anxious and who might like some time to kind of prep. On the other hand, they are now going to be panicking for 2 days, not knowing what's coming at this meeting, and also saying that there might be a support or a representative involved escalates the tone of what they are expecting from this conversation. So either way is legal. It just depends on what's going to be best for this person and your context. You can just pull them into a meeting to start things off, or you can give them some notice if you would prefer. When you're in that meeting, I strongly recommend that you use a script or some bullet points to stay on track. I've run hundreds of these processes and I've been in dozens of meetings. I will still use a script and some bullet points, and I know this process inside and out. This doesn't have to be a very sterile, I am reading from a script today to tell you that we are meeting with you to talk about your performance. It can feel a bit like that. If you've practiced the script a couple of times and gone over your bullet points, what it should be is a tool to help you stay on track, to make sure that you don't say anything foolish or unhelpful, as the case may be, and just to make sure that the meeting goes a bit more smoothly. Now, this is a communication meeting only. Do not let the employee respond. I was in a process once where this employee, who was a really lovely person and really it was a performance issue. It wasn't that he was a bad human. He just kind of wasn't getting to where he needed to be. And in the meeting, he kept saying, oh, okay, what I really need you to know, Sylvie, is blah, blah. And I had to keep saying, thank you, Alex, I actually don't want to hear from you today. You will have your time to give me your side of the story in a couple of days' time. This is just a communication meeting to let you know what's going on. No, I get that. But look, I think it's really important that what you don't have in front of you. I said, Alex, I really appreciate that. It's actually not fair for me to hear what you have to say today. I've had time to prep for this meeting and you haven't, and this is a shock to you. So it's really important that you go away and think about what you want to say and figure out how you want to present things so that you've got some time to make sure that you're saying what you want to say. Yeah, I get that, but I don't need the time. What I want to tell, and like seriously 7 or 8 times, I just had to keep cutting them off and saying, I really appreciate you've got lots you want to tell me. The time to do that will be in 2 days' time when we catch up. It's not fair for me to hear what you have to say right now. So just if you need to just keep cutting people off and kind of stonewalling them, I really encourage you to do that. The employee might have some questions, answer them if you can, and then the meeting adjourns. So no decision's been made, no warning's been issued. You haven't even heard the employee side of the story yet. You are just communicating to them that this disciplinary has started and that you are meeting with them again soon to hear their response. We've talked about timeframes already. So response meeting is the employee's side of the story. So this is their chance to talk at you and give you their perspective. Sometimes this is, if it's a straightforward issue and the employee is a good human, they'll say, yep, I agree. I've got nothing to add. It was my cock up that I didn't submit my timesheets, or it was my bad that I was late and the store was an hour late opening. Sorry, like I get it. Sometimes it's a 15-page counter argument about why you are actually the bully here and they are the victim, and they have never liked you and they've never liked the shoes that you wear, and actually you're a massive asshole for treating them this way, and you kind of get this whole bundled kind of response. There are obviously options in the middle. Sometimes they're a bit more peaceable and sometimes they're a bit more combative. So your role in this meeting is to ask questions, to clarify, don't make a decision or challenge their version of events. You are just here to listen and to ask questions and to clarify and to pick up any kind of missing pieces of their story. I was in a response meeting once where the couple who owned the business had clearly lost faith in this person. And when she was giving her side of the story, the husband sort of lost his temper and just started saying, but you're a liar. You lie and you always lie and you will continue to lie. Why should I trust anything you have to say? And so I had to very quickly adjourn the meeting and pull him aside and say, it is really inappropriate for us, like you've sunk this process, basically. We really need to listen to what the employee has to say. It's okay if we disagree, but this is her chance to give us her side of the story, and later we can decide what we want to do with it. But again, you're not making a decision or judging the person, you're just hearing their version of events. And then the meeting adjourns. By law, you must listen to and consider their feedback. But listening does not equal agreeing. Most of us have what we think are good reasons for behaving the way that we do. And that might be true, but it doesn't mean that the way that we behave is appropriate or is getting the results at work that we need to. So listening and understanding doesn't mean agreeing with the employee or endorsing their choices. So you've got the employee's feedback, you've decided what you want to do about the next steps, and document your response to their feedback. The reason this is important is, again, that legal obligation to consider what they've had to say. If they give you a counter argument or explain their version of events, and then the disciplinary letter just says, we listened to your feedback, we disagree, and now we're firing you, you haven't documented that consideration process. So typically it's you explained that you were running late because you had stopped to rescue a kitten that you saw lost in the car park on the way to work. True story, with a retail worker that we supported. With a retail customer we supported. I understand that this was important to you. However, it meant that you were late to work. I don't accept this as a good reason for your lateness on that occasion. So you're explaining that you've heard what they have to say, but that you disagree with it and why. And that's why you're upholding that point in the disciplinary. Confirm the outcome of the process. Might be no warning. Typically, it will be a formal, a final, or with dismissal. If it's a warning, do include a performance improvement plan. Again, that's because our legal obligations to our staff are to provide them with support to improve whatever the thing is. So typically that involves a PIP after a warning. If it's dismissal, there is this extra process step which is a bit annoying. So if it's a dismissal process, 2 weeks ago, you said we might be considering dismissal as a result of this process. They've been aware of that. They've sought advice. They've given your response, and now you're at the final meeting to confirm that their employment's ending. You need to propose dismissal again, leave the room, give them some time to think about it. So you leave the room and you have a snack or you check your phone, and then 10 minutes later come back in and say, what do you think about my proposal to dismiss you? And they might say, well, yeah, I knew about that because you told me 2 weeks ago. Or they might say, totally unfair, miscarriage of justice, you'll be hearing from my lawyers. You say, okay, well, now I need to consider what your feedback is that you have to say. So you leave the room, you say, does that change our minds? no, we're going ahead with dismissal. Okay, great. You check your phone again and have a cup of tea, and then come back in and say, after considering your final feedback, we are confirming the outcome. We're moving ahead with dismissal. And then the employment ends, the meeting's ended. You can walk them off site if that's the end of their employment, and make sure that you're processing their final pay. So all very straightforward and easy to talk about in a PowerPoint when you don't have employees in the room and nothing's going wrong. But as a broad outline of what the process involves, that's what you can expect. Now, a bit of a legal update on disciplinaries. So the Employment Relations Amendment Act came into force in February of this year, and it had a bucket of changes that, for my money, has been the largest shake-up of employment relations in New Zealand in the time I've been in this industry. So lots of changes. There's changes for contractors with the gateway test. There's this new $200,000 income threshold if you want to bring a PG for unjustified dismissal, removal of the 30-day rule for unions. And relevant for our conversation here, some changes to the way that remedies and decisions are made about personal grievances for sort of bad behaviour at work. So if an employee is found to have done the serious misconduct thing that you alleged, if the employee has contributed to the PG situation, that might be by being non-responsive, by withholding information, by escalating the situation. Contributing is quite a wide range of things. The courts have the authority now to reduce remedies to 100% in the situation. So even if previously you had good reason to manage an issue, but you fell over in the process, the employee, even though they did the bad thing, would get some acknowledgement that they weren't taken through a fair process. These changes appear to give the courts much more leeway to forgive flaws in the process that an employer runs, because if the employee is the problem here, if they have done the serious misconduct, if they have contributed to the situation, the policy position of the government is that they shouldn't be rewarded or they shouldn't be paid for that. So that's one of the changes. And again, if the employee is found to have done the serious misconduct, potentially they will not be eligible for any remedies. Again, even if there were flaws in the process, which previously would have triggered some compensation to them because they have a right to a fair process, this is changing. Now, having just described a new set of laws which makes it sound like we can just fire people who are doing bad shit at work, I do want to caution you and say that this is a very, very new law. It came into force in February. Cases can take months to make their way through the ERA. So we're still not really clear how this law is going to be interpreted in specific cases. Judges are notoriously protective of employee rights. They aren't cowboys who are looking for any excuse to shoot down employees who've done serious misconduct things. So I think that the application of this law is likely to be much narrower than it appears on the face of it. So if you would like to be a test case that people like me get emailed about and show up in our employment law books and get talked about at conferences, you are very welcome to start changing up the way that you do things. But I would suggest that you seek legal advice before you do anything different, and there will probably still need to be some process that's followed. For example, if you are alleging that an employee did the serious misconduct and therefore should not have any remedies, you still have to show that the serious misconduct happened, which typically involves investigating and gathering evidence and hearing their side of the story and confirming that you weren't missing something. So there's probably still a fair bit of process that's required to happen here. We're just not clear about how much looser that can get. So there's been a legal update, but please don't think that this is carte blanche to go ahead and just start firing people. There will be nuances here that we missed because we just don't have enough cases to look at yet. So a quick piece on how MyHR can help. If you're managing issues with your staff, as you may know, you will have employee profiles in your MyHR account. You can take some notes about what's going on so you have a track record of what's happening. Here we have an employee, Walter. This is all demo information. I'm not sharing someone's confidential email with you. Confidential content. So we can see here that we've got a history of poor quality sales proposals from Walter, 2 complaints about sales proposals he's prepared. So there's a pattern of behaviour around his performance that we want to address. So clearly something is happening. You've got the notes to back it up. The next way we can help is you can get in touch. So using the Ask Us messaging platform in the app, we have a 3-hour turnaround time to come back to you on whatever your question is. So that might be as simple as, hi, I need some help with Walter. He's great with customers in person, but his admin skills are shocking. Like, what are my choices? How do I manage the situation? The HR person who picks up with you will go back and look at Walter's notes on his profile and say, gosh, I can see that there's this pattern of poor performance. Here are your choices, your sort of informal tools, your formal tools. What do you want to do here? What do you think Walter would respond best to? And because we're real humans, you can call us. We're not AI. It's why it takes us 3 hours to come back to you, because we're real people looking at your problem and kind of writing you a response. And ultimately, if you do decide to go ahead with a record of discussion, a PIP or a disciplinary, we can write your letters for you and guide you through the process. So here is a disciplinary letter for Walter. It's got the branding of his employer on it. We're saying there's a potential poor performance issue. Here are our concerns. Here are the dates of the proposals. We think this may amount to poor performance. We want to meet with you again. So we're not just telling you what to do next, we're actually giving you the tools, going through the process with you, reviewing what Walter has to say, helping you come to a decision, and then writing your outcome documents. So the support is pretty comprehensive. So bonus resources, you'll get the slides, you'll get a disciplinary process map to give you a bit of an overlay of what happens. You'll be able to book some time with me if you like to. We have had 300 plus people on this call, so I imagine some of you may have questions that I haven't been able to answer, or we won't answer in the Q&A. So you're welcome to book some time with me. I'm an HR person. I'm here to help with HR questions. If I think maybe there's a good fit and maybe we can help you, I might offer to put you in touch with one of our sales team. But the purpose is to just make sure you can get your questions answered and get some time with me if you like. So this brings us to our time for questions. So I'm going to jump out of our slides and jump back into our webinar. We are at 12:47, so we have a little bit of time ahead of us. I'm just going to jump in and start grabbing some questions from the Zoom call. If you have a question you would like to ask and you haven't asked it yet, now's your time. I have 22 questions here. I'm unlikely to get through all of them, but let's see how we go and see how far we get. Eva, kia ora Eva, thanks for joining us, has said, do you need to make a record of informal conversations? I would suggest that you do. This doesn't need to be heavily formal or heavily documented, but what I would suggest that you do is, even in a text or a Slack message or an email follow-up, just say, hey Sylvie, thanks for chatting with me this morning. I know those conversations can be uncomfortable, so thank you for your professionalism. Just a quick catch-up of what we talked about. I explained that your behaviour in some meetings has been inappropriate and gave you some examples. You explained that you've got a sick parent, your mind's a bit all over the show. We agreed that you would take a couple of days off and come back, and that would move on from there. Let me know if I've missed anything. I'm very happy to help support you. I look forward to our relationship continuing in a good direction. So again, it doesn't have to be heavy, but yes, I would suggest, even if you don't follow up with an email, making a note on their employee profile in MyHR or on your own records. So if things do escalate or if things don't get better, when someone like me gets involved, you can show me this record of all the conversations you've had. No one ever says, gosh, I have too many notes about this issue. But we often hear people say, man, I wish I'd taken a note at the time because I've just forgotten the details and I don't remember when it happened. Roanne, kia ora Roanne, thank you for joining us, asks, should a PIP be jointly created? The employee should definitely have the chance to give input. And if the employee is someone who is doing their best and genuinely just needs a bit of help to get to where they need to be, often that can be a really positive, constructive interaction. Sometimes, though, you will get employees who just can't be bothered participating. So at a minimum, I would say that showing the employee a PIP that you've written to say, here's what I think is reasonable to ask you to achieve in the next 4 weeks, 8 weeks, 12 weeks. Can you take a day or two to look at this and give me your feedback? And if you've got changes that are reasonable, I'm happy to include them. And if the employee comes back and engages, cool, you can work with them on it. If they come back and say, no, nothing to change, you can just go ahead. Or if they come back and say, this is bollocks, I think it's all terrible, you're being super unreasonable, you can take that under advice and say, well, I think I'm being pretty reasonable actually. Thank you for your feedback. This is now the PIP that's in place. So yes, an opportunity to contribute, but don't let not being able to get the employee on site prevent you from moving ahead. Anonymous asks, what is the difference between a written warning and a letter of expectation? Which is best to use? So a letter of expectation is less serious than a formal written warning. It would be the equivalent of a record of discussion. And HR people have all different types of names for these things. The labels are less important than what they do. So a letter of expectation is a tool to say, here is what I expect of you. I'm documenting it. This is formal. The tone of this experience is that it's getting a bit more serious, but it's not a warning. It doesn't count towards the series of warnings you're required to give someone if you want to move to termination. So a letter of expectation, less serious. Use it if you're kind of not at the warning stage yet. A formal written warning is the outcome of a disciplinary process where you're proposing an outcome, getting their feedback, and kind of making a decision. So it's more heavy in terms of process requirements, but it's also more useful in terms of moving towards termination if that's something that you're looking to achieve. Anonymous asks, I have an HR colleague who is struggling with an employee who is continuously sick and provides medical certs for their ailments. They are currently on a wellness plan PIP, which is not being met, and they have a history of not being able to meet their 40-hour obligations. In your view, can you discipline someone for excess sickness? The answer is no. Sickness is not a disciplinary matter, but there are totally other tools that you have to manage that situation. That's the topic of a whole other hour's worth of webinar about managing medical incapacity. I definitely have some suggestions for you to manage the situation. What I would say is it's not a disciplinary. You're not punishing them for being sick or for being off or for being unwell, but it's clear that they can't meet their 40-hour-a-week commitment to you, and so there are other choices you need to make. You're welcome to drop me an email after the session if you like, or to book some time in with me and we can talk about that in more detail. You mentioned that if the employee requests more information, it's only necessary to provide relevant information. If they request all personal information under the Privacy Act, does this mean the employer needs to provide everything or just the relevant info? Yeah, great question. If an employee requests a copy of their personal file from you under the Privacy Act, you must provide everything to them that is on their file. So copies of their CV, copies of their pay slips, copies of anything else to do with their employment. So their employment agreement, the policies that they've signed, anything else that lives on their personal file. That is this bundle of documentation here. If there are other things related to the disciplinary, like timesheets or CCTV footage or customer complaints or emails you've sent to them reminding them that they have to do things a certain way, that information might not live on their personal file, but it's relevant to the disciplinary. So you should definitely be providing all this, but only provide their entire personal file if they ask for a copy of it. Dealing with a staff member from Anonymous with clear and ongoing performance and misconduct issues, who's also extremely neurodiverse and struggling with mental health and personal challenges. Feedback conversations end either in tears or in anger. Any suggestions for managing this? I'm trying to be sensitive around personal crises, but when the crises are ongoing, it gets difficult. Firstly, credit to you for being compassionate and working to support this person through the challenges that they're navigating. Ultimately, it is up to you how much energy you want to put into this relationship and into this person, and whether you think it's worth keeping them in your business. And if you decide that it is worth keeping them around and it is important to support them and you do see value in having them as being part of your team, then offering support people to come to these meetings with them might be helpful, offering to write things down so they have a copy in writing, potentially offering them some EAP or some access to a neurodiversity coach who can help them work through their how their autism or their ADHD or their dyslexia shows up at work and kind of put strategies in place. All of those tools are available to you. There is also nothing wrong with saying that I do not have the resources as a manager or a business owner to continue to support this person. I need them to be performing at the level that's required, and I need them to be not taking up this much of my time. And if that person can't get there, then it's nothing about them being a bad human or unworthy or unlovable, but they are not the right person for this job right now, and taking steps to manage that as you need to. Brendan asks, kia ora, Brendan, thanks for coming along. Can I get more info on a support person, their rights, and what to do if they are extremely rude or pushy and ask inappropriate questions at a meeting? Yeah, great question. So I have previously had to say to someone, a support person. This was a parent who was there on behalf of their teenage child in a hospital environment, and the parent would not shut up, like was incredibly aggressive and was escalating the conversation beyond what was just about a pip, like it wasn't even a warning. I had to say to it was a dad, I had to say to the dad, just to clarify, my understanding is that you're here in a support role to support your daughter, and do I have that right? Yes, you're here as a support person. Okay. It's really important that I can hear from your daughter. Let's call her Shan, that I can hear from Shan because I need to know what she thinks about what's been happening and kind of to hear her feedback. And so that de-escalated him for a second. Then he would keep jumping in. And so I eventually had to adjourn the meeting because I kept giving him signals that he needed to shut up. I didn't word it like that, of course, but we got to a point where I said, hey, I'm going to adjourn this meeting. I'm not getting the response from Shan that I need to. And I'm finding that the way that you're behaving yourself is actually making it for us to have this conversation. So let's reconvene and catch up again in 2 days' time. You are welcome to attend, but if you attend as Shan's support person again, I need to be really explicit that the way that you behaved today was not appropriate, and it meant that it was harder for me to get Shan's perspective. I'll drop you an email with a follow-up from today and we'll book another time. Thank you for coming in. Even as an HR person, that's quite a confronting conversation to have, but you can absolutely clarify what role they were in there as a support person, explain that you are not getting a chance to actually hear from the employee, to explain that their behaviour is not appropriate and is escalating the tension in the room, and you just want to bring the temperature down a bit. And eventually, if they kind of don't respond to those prompts, you can adjourn the meeting and say, I'm not able to get to the outcomes we wanted to today because your behaviour is making it hard for me to do that. We are going to reconvene and catch up again, and if you come again as so-and-so support person, I'm going to need your behaviour to be different. So you can manage it. It can be a bit uncomfortable, but support people are there not to obstruct the process. They're there to support the person and make it easier for them to participate. And if they're not doing that, you can manage them. Margot, kia ora Margot, thank you for coming, says, it would be great to hear examples of what this process looks like when the issue is inconsistent performance and each example feels petty. How do you manage a disciplinary process when the behaviour isn't as clear? Great question. The pettiness means that you end up going, I think I'm a huge arsehole. Like I'm pulling this person up on all these little tiny things which on their own aren't a big deal. The answer is to focus on the pattern and the lack of consistency. So what I would do is, I know it's going to make you feel like a serial killer, but it's to start having a spreadsheet where you're tracking all of these issues. And each little lateness or little eye roll or little whatever the behavior is going to feel like you are being a 12-year-old girl or a 12-year-old boy writing out kind of your grievances. But once you've done it for a couple of weeks, I guarantee you that spreadsheet will be busier and busier and busier, and you will have plenty of examples to show that there is a pattern of behaviour. And so what the disciplinary conversation becomes about is not each instance and whether it can be justified, but the fact that there is a pattern here which may amount to poor performance or a pattern which may amount to misconduct. And it's hard to demonstrate a pattern without having all the little petty examples that kind of go along with it. So I give you permission to be petty. I give you permission to document all of that, and please make sure that you're taking notes and that you can bring them to that conversation. Cool. Emily asks, kia ora Emily, we have had issues with an employee who's been put in a lead position for quite some time. So far, there's been an unsigned record of discussion. He doesn't do what's expected, processes aren't being followed, he's doing things he's not being told to do or doing them wrong. We really want to take him out of this lead position with a pay increase and have me, the owner, step back in as a lead role until we can train someone else. What's the best way to do this? We were wanting to do a restructure. You can have as an outcome of a disciplinary process that someone is demoted and their pay is changed. The process is exactly the same. Here are these issues. Here are the evidence as to why this is a problem. Here are the reasons this behavior isn't okay. The chats we've had, the record of discussion, all of this kind of stuff. And so it appears that we're dealing with a poor performance issue. The outcome of this process may be a formal written warning and a demotion from lead to technical role and a reduction in your pay. So you are still proposing these things. The employee still has a right of reply, but that's the mechanism to use. So no change to the proposing feedback outcome kind of process. You're just making the outcome a bit different because you're including a step down from his role and a pay decrease. Thank you for that question, Emily. That was a good one. Let's jump in. We've got quite a few questions here and we're now at 1 p.m. I'm just going to check in because we've got a room booking after me. I'm just going to check to see if that's going to be okay to go over with a bit of time or not. Let me jump in. Call it a whip so I can do 5 more minutes here and then we can wrap up. So Anonymous asks, we've had a case where we needed to have an informal conversation with a staff member for some conduct issues. We were planning to do a record of discussion, but then the employee injured. It's been 2 months since they're due to return to work. We're very concerned. Too much time has passed and their response and our issues have become almost irrelevant. You have a good reason for not having been able to have this conversation. You were planning on it. You were going to talk to them about it, and then something happened and they've been off work for a while. It's up to you whether you want to go ahead with that conversation or not. So if you decide to go ahead with the conversation, then what you can do is catch up with them when they're back and say, hey, look, I need to raise some concerns with you that came up before your injury and before your accident. We will go through them, and I appreciate some time has passed. We were actually planning on having this chat with you about the time of your accident, but obviously we couldn't, and then you were off on leave. So legally, totally fine to go ahead. As you've identified, some time has passed, so it might feel kind of like that's in the rearview mirror at this point. But if the issues are significant enough that you wanted to have a chat about them, I would suggest that they might be significant enough to survive the fact that there's been a bit of a time delay. Brooke asks, would you meet with them first to give them a verbal heads up that there will be a disciplinary meeting and then send them the email with all the supporting docs and set a response meeting? It's up to you. If you want to give someone a verbal heads up that a meeting is coming, you can choose to do that. If you want to just roll into the meeting and have the chat and read through your notes and then send them an email afterwards, that's fine. It depends on the circumstance and what you think that person's going to respond best to. Yeah, it's a bit of a piece of string question, that one, but you have some flexibility about how you flag to someone that there are some issues you want to address. Hannah asks, is it okay to send the allegations in the initial invitation meeting? All the details, advising of the process, set the date for a feedback meeting and offer support and so on. I personally wouldn't run it that way. I think that these meetings are stressful and that we owe our staff the courtesy of a face-to-face meeting to deal with them. So I would have the meeting in person or over Zoom or over the phone call, whatever I can do. And I would say, I'm going to follow up with, I know these meetings can be a shock. I'm going to follow up with everything I've talked about in writing so you have it in front of you. Meeting ends, maybe they've asked some questions, meeting ends, and then my email is going to be, hey, thank you for attending the meeting this morning. As discussed, we have some concerns. Attach the letter, attach the complaints, attach the timesheets, whatever. I personally wouldn't start a process like this just with an email. I think that's likely to escalate the situation and isn't going to contribute to the best employment outcomes. You can do, it's legal. I just personally would start with an in-person meeting as much as I can and then follow up. Cool. Jay, kia ora Jay, thank you for coming, asks, what are your thoughts around having the disciplinary meetings recorded? I'm not in favour. If there is a meeting recorded, it immediately puts people on edge. People are nervous about saying things. You are likely to get far less engagement from the employee. And so I think it in a bad way negatively affects the vibe in the room. And also, if you say something stupid as the employer, or if you slip up, or if you misspeak, you are now on the record as having said something which shows that you have prejudiced the outcome of this disciplinary, or that shows that you aren't really going to listen to the employee, or that shows that you have had a bit of an axe to grind with this person and that's why you're running the dislike. There are so many opportunities to trip over your own feet with recordings that I'm not in favour of them. Now, if you are committed to recording the meeting, use law which says employees can record and don't have to ask for permission. It's not sanctioned, but it is kind of allowed. But as the employer, if you want to record, make sure you have everyone's permission before doing so, but I don't recommend it. Anonymous asks, for those disciplinary meetings, who's in charge of chairing the meeting, the person's manager or HR? I would say 100% the person's manager. That person has this employee as their direct report. They are responsible for their performance. They are responsible for their managing kind of expectations at work. HR is there as a professional advisor and as support for the manager to make sure things run fairly. It's like asking, should you choose what house to buy or should your real estate agent choose what house to buy? You're the person in charge, and the estate agent is there to kind of help manage the process. So HR, I don't think, should ever chair these meetings. I think it should very much be the person's manager with HR and support. Anonymous asks, can you please go over the 90-day trial period dismissal process? Is this different to a disciplinary process? Yes, it is. I can't for time reasons. That's, again, a whole webinar on its own. But if you'd like to drop me an email or to book some time in with me, we can talk about 90-day trial period processes. If a person's been on a PIP for about 4 weeks, from Nikki, kia ora Nikki, about KPIs, performance with an informal plan the right month too, is dismissal the right proposed outcome? So the law is really clear that you have to have given a person a series of warnings related to their behaviour or performance before you can consider termination. So if it's a performance issue, in my view, I would recommend that they have had a formal written warning, a final written warning, and then the third disciplinary process can be about performance. I would say it is illegal to dismiss someone with no warnings in place or only having had PIPs in place. There needs to be, the legal language is, a series of warnings. So going straight from a PIP to dismissal or going straight from KPIs to dismissal, I don't think is defensible. Cool. Jane has asked, can you send me your slides? Yes, Jane, I'll send you slides. They'll come around. And quite a few questions here, sort of still living here. So thank you all for your questions. I really appreciate your engagement. I'm sorry we won't be able to get to all of them. I need to clear out because my colleagues are having a whip in here. But in the follow-up email, you'll get a copy of the slides. You'll get a copy of a disciplinary process map, and then also my email address and my calendar to book some time with me. If you'd like to book some time, please do. There are always questions that come out of these sessions. But otherwise, thank you for joining us. I hope that's been useful and that you have taken something out of today's conversation. So I look forward to seeing you at the next one, and I hope you have a really peaceful rest of your day. Ka kite, we'll see you soon.